Pack your things. You're done.
Diana Holloway's voice cut across the entire 18th floor of Glasshaven Tower, sharp enough to make every head drop. She flicked Marcus Webb's employee badge into a cardboard box like it was trash, crossed her arms, and waited for him to fall apart. Marcus Webb was a black single father who had spent 3 weeks on that floor, doing work no one noticed, absorbing insults no one apologized for, and watching a system designed to crush the people at the bottom. He picked up the photo of his daughter Lily from the box, tucked it against his chest, and walked out without raising his voice once. What Diana didn't know, what nobody on that floor knew, was exactly who she had just fired. And before Marcus even reached the bottom step, he made one phone call that would change everything inside that building. So where are you watching from today? Drop your city in the comments and don't forget to subscribe, because what Marcus does next is the kind of story people need to see. The man they threw away was already deciding who would be next to go. Marcus Webb had been waking up at 5:30 every morning for 3 weeks, making Lily's lunch before she stirred, dropping her at school, and then riding the elevator to the 18th floor of Glasshaven Tower like any other temporary operations employee who needed the work. He wore the same plain badge everyone else wore. He answered to Marcus when people bothered to use his name at all, and to the temp when they didn't. He kept his head down, his notebook close, and his phone on silent. Nobody on that floor had any reason to look at him twice. That was exactly the point. His father, Walter Webb, had built Bentonvale Holdings from 2 second-hand trucks and a handshake promise that the people doing the real work would always be treated with real respect. Walter was 71 now, and the weight of the company had started showing in the way he moved through rooms. Slower, more deliberate, like a man measuring how much time he had left against how much he still needed to do. Before stepping back, he had asked one thing of Marcus: go in through the lowest door. See what the company actually looks like from the ground. Marcus had agreed without hesitation, not because his father asked, but because he had wanted to know the answer himself. What he found on the 18th floor was not what the quarterly reports described. The floor was run by Diana Holloway, a woman who had mastered the particular skill of making cruelty look like management. Her reports were clean, her numbers were consistent, and every performance review she submitted reflected a team that was functional and well supervised. None of that was true. Marcus figured it out within the first week, not through any access to systems or files, but simply by watching. He watched who got interrupted in meetings and who didn't. He watched which ideas disappeared into the air and reappeared later under different names. He watched who stayed late, not because they were dedicated, but because they were afraid of what would happen if they left on time. Diana's 2 closest allies made the floor what it was. Craig Stafford ran the data team with the specific talent of a man who had never once originated an idea, but had perfected the art of being in the room when someone else did. Patricia Nolan handled internal HR oversight, which in practice meant she was the person who decided which complaints went somewhere and which ones quietly disappeared. Together, the 3 of them had built something that functioned less like a department and more like a closed system designed to protect itself. Marcus noticed Raymond Foster on his second day. Raymond was a warehouse logistics coordinator who arrived 15 minutes before his shift every single morning and was the only person on the floor who had used Marcus's actual name the first time they met, extending a hand and saying it plainly like it mattered. One afternoon, Marcus watched Raymond stand at a workstation, staring at a shipping data table that had clearly been altered. The numbers didn't line up. Raymond saw it too. Marcus could tell by the way the older man's jaw tightened. But Raymond didn't say a word. He just turned back to his own screen and kept working. Later, when the floor had mostly cleared out, Marcus asked him about it. Raymond looked at him for a long moment before answering. "My wife's been in chemotherapy for 7 months," he said. "My health insurance is tied to this job. If I make noise, I don't know what happens to that." He wasn't asking for sympathy. He was explaining the math of his silence the way a person explains why they take the long way home every day, not because they want to, but because the short way has become too costly. Marcus didn't say anything in response. He wrote it down later that night in the small notebook he kept in his jacket pocket. Not the words exactly, but the weight of them. Vanessa Mitchell was harder to miss. She was a junior analyst who still walked into meetings like she believed something useful might come out of them. She asked questions that were sharper than anyone seemed comfortable with, proposed changes that were clearly well-researched, and then watched those proposals get ignored or absorbed by people who hadn't written a word of them. Marcus saw it happen during his second week. Vanessa had put together a revised routing proposal for a recurring logistics bottleneck, a genuine fix, the kind that would have saved the company real money. Craig presented it to senior staff 3 days later under his own name with minor changes to the formatting. Vanessa sat in that meeting and said nothing. After it ended, Marcus saw her at her desk with an email open on her screen, a reply drafted and ready to send. She read it once, then deleted it and closed the window. He understood. She had decided the cost of sending it was too high. Marcus spent his third week cataloging what he'd already learned while quietly tracking something worse. A restricted data folder containing sensitive logistics contracts had been accessed without authorization, and the access trail was muddied in a way that didn't look accidental. He followed the proper reporting chain, filed the concern through the internal system, documented the timestamp, kept a copy in his notebook. What happened next told him everything he needed to know about how the 18th floor actually operated. Diana and Craig moved fast. Before any review could be initiated, they had already begun constructing a different version of events. They had obtained access to Marcus's login credentials weeks earlier under the stated reason of supporting an internal audit, a routine-sounding request that Marcus had approved because there had been no reason at the time not to. Now those credentials became the foundation of a fabricated access trail that pointed directly at him. By the time the concern had been logged, the story had already been rewritten with Marcus as the person who had created the problem rather than the one who had reported it. The meeting invitation arrived the next morning. Conference room at the end of the floor. No agenda listed. Marcus walked in to find Diana seated at the head of the table, Craig on her left, Patricia Nolan beside him, and a woman named Claire Dawson from corporate HR completing the row. A termination packet sat on the table already assembled. Diana stated that Marcus had violated data security protocols, that his conduct had created operational risk, and that his employment was being ended effective immediately. Marcus asked to see the original access logs, the actual system records, not the version that had been prepared for this meeting. Patricia cut across him before he could finish the sentence, stating that the decision had already been approved and that his system access had been revoked. There was nothing left to argue with inside that room. Marcus understood that. Diana instructed him to collect his belongings from his workstation while the floor was still occupied. It was not a practical requirement. It was a message to him and to everyone watching. Marcus walked back to his desk without hurrying. He was aware of the silence that had settled over the floor, the kind of silence that happens when people are paying close attention but have decided that looking up would cost them something. He put the photograph of Lily into the box first, then the old pen that had belonged to his father. A simple thing, nothing valuable, but he had carried it every day since Walter gave it to him years ago. Then the small notebook. Raymond stood up. It was a small movement, barely noticeable, but Marcus caught it. The older man pushing his chair back and starting to rise the way a person does when they've decided to say something they've been holding for a long time. Then Craig looked at him. Not a word, just a look, steady and deliberate, and Raymond sat back down. He placed both hands flat on his desk, very still, like a man physically holding himself in place. Vanessa didn't look away. She watched Marcus the entire time he packed, and the expression on her face wasn't pity. It was something closer to shame, but not directed at him. Marcus recognized it because he had seen it before. It was the look of someone who knew exactly what was happening and had calculated again that speaking would cost more than staying quiet. Marcus picked up the box and walked the length of the floor toward the exit. When he reached Diana, he stopped. "Are you sure this is how you want it to end?" he said. His voice was level with no anger in it, which seemed to unsettle her more than anger would have. Diana looked at him with the confidence of someone who had never had reason to question their own position. "People like you don't get to decide how anything ends here," she said. Marcus looked at her for one moment longer, then walked to the elevator, rode it to the ground floor, and stepped out through the front doors of Glasshaven Tower into the open air. He set the cardboard box down on the front steps. The building rose behind him, glass and steel, 41 floors built by his father's hands and his father's name. He took out his phone and called Gloria Hartman. Gloria was the company's general counsel, a woman who had been with Benton Vale for over 2 decades and who understood exactly what a situation required before it was fully explained to her. Marcus told her to freeze all data logs, cameras, personnel files, and performance records on the 18th floor going back 4 years. He told her to convene the board. His voice didn't waver. It wasn't the voice of a man who had just been humiliated. It was the voice of a man who had spent 3 weeks learning exactly what needed to be fixed and had now decided it was time to fix it. "And Gloria," he said, "fire every one of them." He picked up the box, walked to his car, and drove to pick up Lily from school. She came running out with a drawing she'd made in class, something colorful and only partially identifiable as a house, and held it up before she even reached the car door. Marcus looked at it and smiled, a real smile, not the kind he'd been managing for 3 weeks. He put the drawing carefully on top of the photo in the box, buckled her in, and drove home through Brackenport while she talked about her day in the unhurried way that children talk when they trust that someone is genuinely listening. That night after Lily was asleep, Marcus sat at the kitchen table with his notebook open. He read back through 3 weeks of observations, names, dates, patterns, specific incidents described in plain language. Raymond's silence, Vanessa's deleted email, the altered shipping table, the fabricated access trail, the termination meeting that had been prepared before he even filed his concern. He read it all the way through once, closed the notebook, and left it on the table. Tomorrow, the 18th floor would find out who he was. But more than that, they would find out what he intended to do about what he had seen. The 41st floor of Glasshaven Tower looked nothing like the 18th. Up here, the ceilings were higher. The light came in at a different angle, and everything felt like it had been designed to signal that certain decisions were made here and not elsewhere. Marcus had been in this room before many times, but never like this. Never as the man who had just been escorted up in a private elevator with a cardboard box under his arm and a phone call already made. Walter Webb was standing near the window when Marcus came in. He didn't move toward his son right away. He looked at him the way a man looks at something he has been thinking about for a long time and is finally seeing clearly. Gloria Hartman was at the conference table with 2 members of the board, her laptop open, a legal pad already covered in notes. The room was quiet in the way rooms are quiet when everyone present understands that whatever is said next will matter. Walter spoke first. "Tell me what you saw," he said. "Not what you felt. What you serious claims require serious evidence, not a notebook. Evidence." Marcus nodded. "That's why I called Gloria before I left the building." Gloria took it from there. Her team had already begun pulling the original system logs, not the version prepared for Marcus's termination meeting, but the raw records from the infrastructure layer below what floor managers could access or edit. What those records showed was unambiguous. The restricted data folder had been accessed from Craig Stafford's physical workstation. The timestamp placed him there after normal working hours on a Tuesday evening. The credentials used were Marcus's, but the device signature was Craig's machine. And in an email draft that Craig had never deleted, only moved to a subfolder labeled Admin Misc, were 11 words from Diana Holloway. "Make sure the trail points back to the temp account." The board members read the printout without speaking. One of them set it face down on the table when he finished, like he needed a moment before he could look at anything else. Walter read it standing up, and when he finished, he folded it once and handed it back to Gloria without comment. The silence in the room shifted. It was no longer the silence of people waiting for information. It was the silence of people who had received it and were now reckoning with what it meant. "This wasn't impulsive," Walter said finally. "They built this before they pulled the trigger." Marcus said, "They built it the week after I filed the data concern. which means they knew I'd seen something and they moved to discredit me before any review could start. What had looked like a routine termination was now something else entirely, a coordinated effort to remove a witness and assign him blame for the very thing he had reported. The board authorized a full forensic review of the 18th floor before the meeting ended. Gloria's team would have 48 hours to pull everything: emails, access logs, personnel files, performance records going back 4 years, and the camera footage from every hallway and common area on that floor. Claire Dawson, the HR representative who had sat in on Marcus's termination without raising a single objection, was included in the scope of the review. Her presence in that room without any documented pushback placed her inside the pattern the audit was designed to map. That evening, Walter called an all-staff meeting for the following afternoon in the main atrium of Glasshaven Tower. The stated reason was a leadership announcement. The message went out to every floor, every department, every employee badge registered in the system. Diana received it the same way everyone else did, and by all accounts, she spent that evening assuming she was about to be recognized for handling a security issue before it escalated. The atrium could hold several hundred people. By the time Walter took the small stage near the far wall, the room was full and unsettled in the way large groups get when they sense something significant is coming but can't yet see its shape. Diana stood near the front with Craig. The people doing the real work deserved to be treated like it mattered. Then he said that the person who would carry that principle forward had been working on the 18th floor for the past 3 weeks under a temporary badge. Marcus walked out from the side of the stage. The room went still in the way that isn't empty, it's full of recognition of people replaying conversations and realizing they have new meaning. Diana's face lost its color completely and quickly. Craig didn't move at all. Patricia looked down at the floor and kept her eyes there. In the rows of employees behind them, Raymond Foster straightened in his chair, not dramatically but unmistakably, his shoulders pulling back and leveling, after years of having learned to make himself smaller. Vanessa Mitchell exhaled audibly and didn't try to cover it. Marcus spoke to the room without notes. He told them that what had happened to him on the 18th floor was not an isolated incident. It was the visible surface of something that had been running underneath the company for years. A system in which the people with authority over performance reviews, complaint processes, and data access had used all three to protect themselves and punish anyone who threatened that protection. He said that Raymond Foster had been forced to sign a false evaluation to keep his wife's medical coverage. He said that Vanessa Mitchell had watched her own work presented under someone else's name and had been called oversensitive when she objected. He said there were others, and that their names and their stories were already part of the formal record. Gloria presented the first layer of evidence: the access logs, the device signature, the email draft, the camera footage. The room absorbed it in the way people absorb information that confirms what they already suspected but never had proof of. There was no collective gasp. There was something quieter and more durable than that. Marcus ended with a single statement: "I'm not going to fix an unjust system by making a reckless decision. But anyone who participated in destroying people inside this company will not have a place here going forward." That night, the independent audit team worked through until morning. What they surfaced went further than the board had anticipated. Diana had blocked a promotion of at least 9 employees whose performance records showed clear qualification for advancement. Craig had attached his name to 6 separate improvement proposals that originated entirely with other people. Patricia had reclassified formal complaints about the floor's culture as interpersonal disputes, effectively removing them from any systemic record. The floor had been operating as a closed and self-protective system for at least 4 years. Testimonies began arriving through the independent reporting channel Gloria had opened. Most were submitted without names attached. Raymond submitted his with his name on it. He described the evaluation he had signed, the conversation in which he had been told what would happen to his benefits if he became difficult, and the specific Tuesday evening when he had seen Craig alter the shipping table and had made the calculation that saying nothing was the only thing he could afford. Vanessa submitted hers with her name as well. She described 4 separate instances in which her work had been taken and the single complaint she had filed 18 months earlier that had been returned to her as evidence of a conflict she had allegedly initiated. Marcus was in his temporary office on the 40th floor when Raymond's audio file came through. A recording Raymond had made on his personal phone during a meeting 2 years earlier mentioned almost as a footnote in his testimony. Marcus pressed play. Diana's voice came through, clearly relaxed, in the way people are when they believe they are not being documented. "Temp workers don't leave a paper trail that anyone follows up on," she said. "Nobody remembers their names." Marcus set the phone down. He sat with that recording for a long time, not because he needed to hear it again, but because of what it represented. It wasn't just an insult directed at him, it was a philosophy. The operating assumption of an entire management approach that people without permanent status, without relationships, without names that mattered to anyone in power, could be used and discarded without consequence. That they were, by definition, forgettable. That evening, Lily called him on video. She was in her pajamas, sitting on her bed with a book open beside her that she clearly had no intention of reading. She looked at his face on the screen for a moment the way children look at parents when they're reading something the adult doesn't think they're showing. "Did you win, Dad?" she asked. Marcus looked at his daughter and thought about what it would mean to answer that question cleanly. He thought about what he would be teaching her if the answer he gave was shaped by the need to appear strong rather than to be honest. "Not yet," he said. "But we're going to." After the call ended, Marcus signed the emergency suspension orders for Diana Holloway, Craig Stafford, Patricia Nolan, and 4 additional personnel identified in the audit as having direct involvement in the documented conduct. He instructed Gloria to prepare formal termination documentation for each individual where the evidence was complete, and he directed his assistant to schedule a meeting with the full staff of the 18th floor for the following afternoon, not in the atrium, but on the floor itself, in the space where all of it had happened. The words he had said to Gloria on the front steps 2 days earlier, fire every one of them, had started as the only true thing he could say in that moment. Now they were becoming something more considered and more permanent. The 18th floor looked different in the morning light without Diana Holloway in it. Not physically different. The desks were in the same positions. The screens showed the same dashboards. The same hallway led to the same conference room at the far end. But the atmosphere had changed in the way spaces change when the person who controlled them is no longer there. People moved through the floor more slowly. Not from grief, but from uncertainty. The way you move through a room after the furniture has been rearranged and you haven't yet rebuilt the habit of knowing where everything is. Marcus arrived early and walked the floor once before anyone else came in, stopping at the workstation where he had spent 3 weeks. The chair was the same. The monitor was the same. Someone had already cleared away the temporary badge that used to hang on the partition beside it. He stood there for a moment, then kept walking. By mid-morning, Diana Holloway, Craig Stafford, Patricia Nolan, and 4 additional personnel had each been formally notified of their suspension and instructed to report to the main conference room at 2 o'clock that afternoon. Gloria would be present. Marcus would be present. The documentation was complete, and the decisions had already been made. What remained was the act of stating them clearly in the place where the harm had occurred. They arrived together. Diana walked in first, her expression arranged into something meant to look composed, but landing closer to brittle. Craig followed without making eye contact with anyone. Patricia took a seat at the far end of the table and kept her hands folded in front of her. Gloria set a stack of folders on the table and opened the first one. What followed was not theatrical. Gloria walked through the evidence file by file, the access logs, the device signature, the email draft with Diana's instruction written in plain language, the camera footage showing Craig at his workstation after hours, the 6 improvement proposals with their original authorship established through metadata, the 9 blocked promotions cross-referenced against actual performance data, and the complaint files that Patricia had reclassified with the original submissions attached alongside the altered versions, so the changes were visible side by side. Diana listened to all of it and said that she had been protecting the floor's performance metrics under pressure from leadership above her. She said the expectations placed on the 18th floor had been unrealistic and that her decisions were responses to demands she had not created. Craig said the culture of the floor had been shaped from above, not from within. Patricia said she had followed HR procedure as she understood it. Then Diana did something no one in the room had anticipated. She reached into the folder she had brought with her and placed a second set of documents on the table. Printed emails dated across the past 2 years, each one bearing the name of a senior board member. The emails contained specific instructions directing Diana to prioritize surface metrics over personnel development to manage headcount quietly, and to keep internal friction from surfacing to the executive level before the planned leadership transition. "I didn't build this alone," Diana said. "I was handed the blueprint." The room went very still. Gloria picked up the documents and read through them without expression. Marcus looked at Diana across the table, not with surprise because he had known the audit might lead somewhere higher, but with the particular weight of a man who has just watched the problem become larger than he had prepared for in this room. He said, "I've heard what you're describing. The investigation is going to follow that question, who set the conditions for this floor, and whether others above you bear responsibility for what those conditions produced. That inquiry is already open, and these documents will be part of it." Then he continued without raising his voice. "But I want to be clear about what that does and doesn't change. The existence of pressure from above does not explain falsifying an access trail to frame a colleague for a security breach you committed. It doesn't explain taking someone's work and presenting it as your own for years. It doesn't explain reclassifying a formal complaint to protect yourself from its contents. Those were choices. You made them on specific days in specific moments when other choices were available." Diana looked at him with the last instrument she had left. "You're doing this because of what happened to you personally," she said. "This is all personal." Marcus met her eyes. "If it had only happened to me," he said, "I might have let it go. I have that option. The people in Raymond Foster's position don't have that option. The people in Vanessa Mitchell's position don't have that option. You built something that worked specifically because the people it targeted couldn't afford to fight back. That's what this process is about." He turned to Gloria, who slid the formal termination letters across the table, one for each person present. Marcus stated the reason for each termination individually: falsification of system records, misappropriation of employee work product, deliberate misclassification of formal complaints, participation in coordinated retaliation against a reporting employee. Each reason was stated out loud in plain language without softening. When it was over, Diana stood and said at the door, "Not everyone on the board is going to be comfortable with where this goes next," Marcus said. "Then they'll have the same conversation I just had with you, and the same documentation in front of them." After they left, Marcus stood in the empty conference room and looked through the glass wall at the floor outside the desks, the people at their screens, the ordinary texture of a workday carrying on. He thought about Raymond arriving 15 minutes early every morning for years, making himself reliable and present inside a system that was slowly draining him. He thought about Vanessa opening that email draft and closing it, choosing silence not because she didn't know what was right, but because the cost of being right had been made too high. He thought about all the people who had filed complaints that went nowhere, who had eventually stopped trusting what they could see with their own eyes. Then he walked out and asked everyone to gather. The staff assembled in the open area between the workstation clusters. Marcus stood at the center without a podium or a prepared statement. He told them that the individuals who had been managing the floor were gone, and that the investigation would continue, including the question of who above that level had contributed to the conditions. He told them the outcome of that inquiry would be made available to everyone in the department. He said, "I'm not asking you to trust me right now. That's not something I can request. It has to be earned. And we're at the beginning of that process, not the end of it." Then he told them what was going to change. Every performance evaluation going back 4 years would be reviewed by an independent team. Any employee denied a promotion during that period would be contacted individually and their case reassessed against the original criteria. Every complaint closed under the prior HR oversight structure would be reopened. A direct reporting line to the office of the incoming chair was being established, not routed through floor management, not filtered through any intermediate layer, but direct. And every person being considered for a leadership role going forward would be assessed not only on performance metrics, but on how they treated the people they were responsible for. He turned to Raymond Foster, who was standing near the back of the group. "Raymond," Marcus said, "I'd like you to be part of the internal culture advisory group we're forming. Because the thing I need most right now is people who understand what this floor has felt like from the inside, not from a report." Raymond looked at him steadily and gave a single nod. It was a small gesture, but the people standing near him would remember it later, the way his posture changed when he did it, something long compressed, finally allowed to release. Then Marcus looked at Vanessa Mitchell, who was standing near the window with her arms crossed in the way of someone who has learned to take up less space than she was entitled to. "The routing proposal," he said. "The one that went up under Craig Stafford's name 14 months ago. The metadata shows it originated in your files. We're restoring your authorship on the record, and I want you to lead the implementation team. The project was approved. It should have had your name on it from the beginning." Vanessa uncrossed her arms. She looked at him with an expression that was trying to stay neutral and not quite managing it. "Why do you trust me to lead it?" she asked. Marcus said, "Because I saw you write that email, and I saw you not send it. Someone who writes it and doesn't send it knows exactly what's right. They just haven't had a reason to believe it mattered. You have one now." The meeting ended without ceremony. People drifted back to their desks and the floor returned to its ordinary sounds. Keyboards, low conversation, the distant chime of an elevator. But something in it was different, and everyone present could feel it even if no one had the words for it yet. Walter was waiting in the hallway outside the 41st floor when Marcus came up. He hadn't been in the termination meeting. He stood with his hands in his jacket pockets, looking at his son with the expression of a man who has asked a hard question of someone he loves and received an answer he can respect. "You didn't use it like a hammer," Walter said. "You told me not to," Marcus said. Walter looked at him for a moment. "I told you not to. You didn't even when you had every reason to." He put a hand briefly on Marcus's shoulder, then turned and walked toward the office at the end of the hall. Marcus moved into the chairman's office the following morning. It was a large room with windows on two sides, and the kind of quiet that comes from height and glass and distance from the street. The first thing he placed on the desk, set it on the corner of the desk where he could see it from wherever he was sitting. Some people might have framed the photo and put the box away. Marcus left the box whole. It wasn't a monument. It was a reminder of what it felt like to be the person standing on the other side of every decision he would now make from that chair. The person who packed a box and walked out of a building with nowhere to appeal and no one to call except the right person at exactly the right moment. He never wanted to lose access to that feeling, because the day he lost it was the day he would become the thing he had spent 3 weeks studying. That evening, he drove home through Brackenport in the early dark. Lily was at the front door before he reached the porch, which meant she had been watching for him, which meant the question she'd asked 2 nights ago on the phone had been sitting with her the same way it had been sitting with him. "Did you win, Dad?" she asked. The same words, the same serious face. Marcus crouched down to her level. "Not just me," he said. "The people who were afraid to speak up, they won too." Lily considered this with the gravity that children bring to information they intend to keep. Then she nodded, apparently satisfied, and went back inside. Marcus stood on the porch for a moment in the dark, looking at the lit windows of the house. Tomorrow, he would go back to Glasshaven Tower and begin the longer work, the audits, the restructuring, the careful process of building something in the place where the old thing had been. Trust, as he had told the floor, was not something you could request, but you could build the conditions where it became possible again, and that was the only place to start. He went inside, locked the door behind him, and for the first time in 3 weeks, he slept without the notebook open on the table. There's something in Marcus's story that stays with you after the last scene. Not the power move, not the moment the floor found out who he really was, but the cardboard box still sitting on the corner of his desk. He could have thrown it away. He kept it because he understood something that a lot of people in positions of authority eventually forget, that the way you treat someone who can't fight back is the truest measure of who you are. Most of us will never run a 41-floor company. But most of us have been in a room where we saw something wrong and calculated whether it was safe to say so. Most of us have been Raymond at some point, holding something in because the cost of speaking felt too high. And some of us have been Vanessa writing the email knowing we're right and closing the window anyway. Marcus's story is a reminder that dignity isn't something other people grant you. It's something you carry in, and either a system respects it or it doesn't. And when it doesn't, that says everything about the system and nothing about you. If that's the kind of story that matters to you, the kind where people who were written off end up changing the room, then subscribe and stay close. There are more of these coming, and every single one of them is worth your time.